an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Stone Sky, Broken Earth Book 3. Chapters Sil Anagist, which is unnumbered, and then chapters 5 and 6, You Are Remembered, and Nassun Makes Her Fate. In these chapters, Essun runs into somebody that she remembers from the fulcrum, and that dude is not doing super well. Then we go to Nassun, and she is doing a little bit better than I expected, and they wind up finding the entrance to the place they have been seeking. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very, very much to Denise for commissioning this episode. Denise commissioned this as a voyeur, but not because she actually wanted me to read it out loud. She talked to me about this first. I frequently run over time when I talk about these books because the themes are really, really deep, and there are a lot of implications to plot twists and things. So she decided to purchase an episode that was like longer in length than usual. And this way I have an hour and a half to talk about it rather than just the usual hour. And I really appreciate that. It's very considerate of her and generous. And hopefully that will work out for all of you listening, and you will agree that this was a good decision. So this first chapter, Sil Anagist 4, is another like throwback to life in Hoa's early days. And it is absolutely fascinating. I still don't really understand it. And I know we're kind of not entirely meant to understand it, because part of the thing that's happening here is that Hoa doesn't even really understand it. Like, and by doesn't understand, I mean, we are seeing things from the perspective that he had at the time. As of now, I believe he does know what happened back then, and he has the perspective to have comprehended everything. But we are getting fed information through the lens of his understanding at the time. And he does not fully grasp what his role is here, and the way that people are treating him and others like him. And this is just this has so many directions that I could go in with my theories. I'm going to pick the one that for me rings the most true. But first I'm going to read you a couple of these portions because I want to give a bit of background on what I'm talking about here. So it starts out with talking about energy. And, this is the thing with the Orogenes, is that they are shifting and moving energies around, because while Earth seems like a static thing to us, especially on the surface, there is a lot moving around. There are all kinds of different pressures, and there is densities and masses that outweigh one another or have impact on one another. There is cold and heat, and there are, molten fragments inside that shift things around. While everything that is movable about Earth on the surface is mostly stretched throughout such a period of time as to seem to us still, because we don't live long enough to see the changes. Obviously, to Orogenes and to stone people, which is what I'm going to continue calling them, but it's it doesn't seem like they're exactly that, though. It's a weird... He is exactly that, I think, but she isn't. But this is obviously a living organism to them that is part of them. It feels like they talk through the earth in a way that isn't like the way that we talk through the air. There is a connection via the earth that feels much more intimate somehow. And like they are able to be more precise, if anything, with their communications through the earth than we are through mere words, because there is more happening with the communication through the earth. You are able to get across more than just what you're saying. You're able to get across like an emotional component to things and an implication. And one could argue that we are still able to do that just speaking because of body language. And that probably is a fair comparison, because he talks about how they don't really do body language. These stone people have like trained themselves to not really show emotion. And that is both a coping mechanism for knowing that they need to hide things from the people that are running them. But also there is like an element of them being trained to do it this way because they know that human beings do not want to really see them as human. So they hide their reactions in order to make themselves seem more divorced from humankind, even though they do feel things the same way. And they could react with their facial expressions and body language the same way. There's a moment a little bit later where Hoa is getting his hair braided, and this woman like pulls on his hair a little bit too hard with a brush, and he doesn't react, but it hurts. And he knows that if he reacts and shows that it hurts, they're going to be made uncomfortable by the knowledge that he has that kind of feeling like an ordinary human being. And Hoa seems, honestly, at this point, Hoa seems very content with the idea that they want these stone people to be separate. Hoa has accepted this at face value. In a way, it's clear some of his fellows haven't. And certainly the other of them, which looks to be more of an orogeny in the way that we know them, a human being who has the soft flesh and, the regular, more manageable hair and the overall vibe of a regular person, but she is still able to communicate with them through the earth. It's a really interesting thing because it seems like there's a suggestion that she was made, but I can't and I know that this was addressed before. I thought this time around in this return to this period in Hoa's life that we would get to see a little bit more of what could have happened to her to make her into what she is. And it doesn't really seem like that's going to be explained until maybe the end of the book. It feels like that's actually being saved. So, all right, we're going to go to him talking about the energies and the way that they handle the energies. This is our role, to weave together those disparate energies, to manipulate and mitigate, and, through the prism of our awareness, produce a singular force that cannot be denied, to make of cacophony symphony. The great machine, called the Plutonic engine, is the instrument. We are its tuners. And this is the goal, Geo-Arcanity. Geo-Arcanity seeks to establish an energetic cycle of infinite efficiency. If we are successful, the world will never know want or strife again, or so we are told. The conductors explain little beyond what we must know to fulfill our roles. It is enough to know that we, small, unimportant we, will help to set humanity on a new path toward an unimaginably bright future. We may be tools, but we are fine ones put to a magnificent purpose. It is easy to find pride in that. So, this feels not true, right? Like, this feels like they have been fed a line about what they are doing in order to give them an inflated sense of purpose, in order to assuage their doubts about what it is they're doing. Everything about this is setting off a bunch of red flags, but I can't really put my finger on what the fuck they could actually be doing. All I can think is whatever it is they're working on is going to be what results in losing the moon. But I can't decide if that was an accidental thing or if it was on purpose. I can't decide if this is like they're being honed and taught to shape and change these energies because somebody wants to get rid of the moon for some reason that I don't understand, or if they are being put to work on a different thing that then results in a side effect they didn't foresee of losing the moon. Now, I may be completely off base here, and the moon has nothing to do with what it is they're working on and won't have anything to do with it. But as of right now, it feels suspect to me. So, we'll see. So then he says, we are attuned enough to each other that the loss of Tetlewa causes trouble for a time. When we join to form our initializing network, it's imbalanced. Tetlewa was our countertenor, the half wavelengths of the spectrum. Without him, I am closest, but my natural resonance is a little high. The resulting network is weaker than it should be. Our feeder threads keep trying to reach for Tetlewa's empty middle range. Gewa is able to compensate for the loss, finally. She reaches deeper, resonates more powerfully, and this plugs the gap. We must spend several days reforging all the network's connections to create new harmony. But it isn't difficult to do this, just time-consuming. This isn't the first time we've had to do it. So, this brings up all kinds of questions. And there is a conversation about this a little bit later. I think I'll wait and I'll talk about Tetlewa when we have that conversation with Kalenli, because there are some lines there that just really need to be read out loud. So then Hoa talks about Kalenli showing up, and Kalenli is the one that seems almost human. But she has this fucking ability that none of the stone people seem to really have. There is a depth and ability of stretching out that they don't possess. And there is talk later of the fact that in fact, all of the stone people have the capacity to do what she does. But for whatever reason, they don't have the actual ability. And that remains the sort of frustrating thing, is not understanding why they technically should be able to do this and yet can't. And there is some suspicion in my mind that Kalenli could show them how to in this, within these walls, but she does not want to. And she arranges for them to be brought outside on a bit of a field trip, which we don't get to see in these chapters. It ends with them agreeing to be sent outside, but it is extremely exciting to me. I want to know so bad what's going on, because I have a hard time believing Kalenli's just you need to experience the world, and it's just that. I feel like Kalenli's oh yeah, I got some people that I need you to meet. I have some things I need to show you. Y'all have been lied to. We shall see. She may not even need to do that. I have this idea in my head of if you are going to be trying to convince people of a thing, that you need to have smoking guns of some kind to sort of demonstrate to them exact examples of what they've been lied to about. It could be that simply showing them the outside world at all will be such a shock to them and so far outside of what they expected that they will just from that begin to realize, oh, I don't understand the world. Shit. Because let me tell you guys, it is really like alarming as you get older and begin to see how many preconceived notions you had that you didn't even realize were there. Like, and a lot of the problem is you will have preconceived notions that other people also have. So the two of you are unconsciously backing one another up about shit that you both are actually ignorant of. But you are confident that because you both have the same notion, it must be correct. And it's just like, no, you both are simply similarly sheltered from reality. And that is what I'm wondering, is that like this will be maybe just a kind of a blow to their senses overall, and will open up their eyes to the fact that they haven't got any sort of information that is pure. All of the information that they know of is filtered through people who have an agenda relaying it to them. And that isn't the same thing. Like, even pure information, which when I say that, mean your own personal experience, that's not really pure. It's going to be filtered through your own perception of things, your preconceived ideas of things, your understanding of what you're seeing and the context that you have of it. Conlenly has used the word context a few times in this chapter. But at the least, there is something to be said for personal experience giving you there. So this is the thing that I find really interesting about personal experience. It is simultaneously something that you filter when you experience it and try and make sense of via your own understanding of the world in general. But there is another element to it that I think we don't really pay enough attention to because it's not as easily quantified as like fact. And that is your gut reaction to a thing. What I mean by that is, and many of you out there probably will know exactly what I'm talking about. There have been, for example, I'll try, I can't think of a very specific one, but I'll say in general, over the past few years, as I have begun to investigate social justice issues, and as I have begun to question my own reactions to things or my own interpretation of things, I have begun to realize that there were many things that, while I didn't have the vocabulary to express what was problematic, or I didn't have the background context to understand the depth of why something felt wrong, there were many times in my teens and 20s that somebody would say something and I would be like, this is making me feel wrong. I don't like what they just said. It feels really ugly. It seems really pointed and nasty, but I can't figure out why. And I'm not going to say anything to them or outwardly show that I took offense because I can't really figure out why I feel this way. I've just thought of an example, and this is a really early one. I worked somewhere and it was a kitchen and it was mostly guys. And it was actually all guys, actually, except for one woman who worked out in the front. And the dudes started calling me Bubbles. And I couldn't understand why they would do that, because that does not feel like a suitable nickname for somebody like me. And at the time, I was kind of like, why does this bother me so much? Like, I had always been somebody that was like, it'd be kind of fun to have a weird nickname. And then once I got one, I was like, what the fuck is this? And the dude who had sort of like gotten it started and on calling me Bubbles was sort of the head chef, and he was an idiot. And I began to realize once I got older and like looked back at that experience, he was patronizing me. He was minimizing me. I think he could sense I was smarter than he was and more competent than he was. And so he gave me a sort of diminutive nickname that made me seem non-threatening as a way of sort of keeping me in my place. And it's a small thing. I don't even think he realized that he was being kind of antagonistic when he did it. I think he was thinking he was being like kind of playful, but I think there was really more to it than that. And at the time, it bothered me. And I kind of like got confrontational with him at one point about it and was like, why are you calling me that? And he tried to defend himself, and I sort of like let it drop because, again, I didn't know how to express why this irritated me. And that is an example of like a gut reaction where you're like, no, this isn't right. But you don't really understand yet the dynamics of power, the way that someone's ego can be threatened by you, even if you are not doing anything to cause that kind of concern in them. I wasn't after his job. I didn't really do anything that had anything to do with his entire section of the restaurant. Really, there shouldn't have been this thing with him. But I was somebody who would occasionally run up against things that he had done wrong and have to come over and be like, okay, what is this? Because we need to do X, Y, Z, and you guys have done this, and we know that's not how that's supposed to be. And I think he didn't like it. And that's a really small example, but as I get older, there are all kinds of like things that I'm learning are slurs, things that I'm learning are rooted in like racist assumptions or are very classist, elitist, whatever, that did bother me, but I didn't get it. And so when other people would do it, I would let it slide. And sometimes I would do it because it was like, well, I can't really figure out what's wrong with it. So this is the best way to say it, I guess. Not understanding. And I'm wondering if that is going to happen here. If they're going to just start to like have like gut reactions to things where they're like, this doesn't seem right. And it will take a little while for that next step for them to get past that gut reaction of knowing this is wrong, but they don't yet have the words for what's wrong. So yeah, I think within personal experience, gut reaction is overlooked. It's something that we sort of treat as if because there aren't words for what we are experiencing or we have trouble expressing them, that they don't really count. But I think gut reaction can be very telling. You know, there is something in us that can feel the malice in the phrasing of a sentence, even if intellectually we cannot piece together what feels malicious about it. We know that's what's happening here, you know? So I find this really, really interesting. So Hoa is talking about how Kalenli has this ability that manages to sort of smooth out the edges of the work that they're doing and make their work much more focused and more highly powered. But she is not consistently working with them. So Hoa finds it kind of frustrating that, like, you know, she's really good at this and really useful, but also they aren't letting her consistently do this with them. And there doesn't seem to be a plan of her joining them permanently. So there's a part of Hoa who's like, yeah, she's great at this and really helpful when she shows up. But also I don't really want to get used to her help because that just gets us all feeling like, oh yeah, we've got this. And then she doesn't show up the next day and we're like, fuck, no, we don't. And it's mentioned that there is this onyx that is a power source that she connects with that is normally kind of a devouring chaos is the words used. And that she is able to somehow connect with this and pull power in a way that others are not able to do with that stone. And this, if I'm not mistaken, is the stone that Essun connected with, the onyx. So it makes sense why Hoa is thinking about this woman and Essun. And at one point in a previous chapter, it was like, you know, she didn't probably really look that much like you, but I keep picturing her as looking like you. When we engage the onyx, it punishes us, stripping everything we can spare and leaving us in a shutdown sleep for hours or days. But not her. Its threads caress rather than rip at her. The onyx likes her. This explanation is irrational, but it occurs to all of us, so that's how we begin to think of it. Now she must teach us to be more likable to the onyx in her stead. So, really interesting. I don't know what that means, but it must have something to do, I think, with the silver, which is what they keep calling the magic. I feel like that has to be part of it because these stone people, I'm pretty sure, are not taught to connect with that. And I feel that might be what's happening for her. So she talks about to them the fact that she seems more focused and sharper than them is the fact that she has external experience that they don't have. She has even been to Zero Site, where the moonstone rests. We are in awe of this. Guys, is the moonstone is it like a genuine giant moonstone? Or is it the moon? I'm never really sure what we're talking about here. So she says, she's talking to Hoa about the fact that they need more context. I think there's a way I can help you and the others do that if I can get you out of this place. You need to understand more about yourself, what you are. I don't understand why she thinks I don't understand. I'm a tool. She says, if you're a tool, shouldn't you be honed as fine as possible? Her voice is serene, and yet a pent, angry jitter of the entire ambient, air molecules shivering, strata beneath us compressing, a dissonant grinding whine at the limit of our ability to cess, tells me that Kalenli hates what I have just said. I turn my head to her and find myself fascinated by the way this dichotomy fails to show in her face. It's another way she's like us. We have long since learned not to show pain or fear or sorrow in any space above ground or below the sky. The conductors tell us we are built to be like statues, cold, immovable, silent. We aren't certain why they believe we actually are this way. After all, we are as warm to the touch as they. We feel emotion, as they seem to, although we do seem less inclined to display it in face or body language. Perhaps this is because we have earth talk, which they don't seem to notice. This is good. In the earth, we may be ourselves. It has never been clear to us whether we were built wrong or whether their understanding of us is wrong, or whether either matters. So I keep running across them being told that they were built. And again, I don't know how much of that to believe. Like, it really feels like the MO of an oppressive group to pretend that they have a hand in the creation of the oppressed group somehow. Like they take credit somehow. And that's not something that, I can really point to a particular example in the real world, but I could definitely see that being a thing with a being that feels so separate from humanity, like that has a very different origin. And were they built on purpose? Are they an accident? Are they the first draft? And Kalenli is like the correct version that they were going for in the first place, maybe. So Kalenli leaves and doesn't come back for a few days, but is still sort of like distantly connected to the network that they all use in the earth to speak. So they can still sort of feel her around. Not all of the others do like Kalenli. Gewa in particular is belligerent about it and sends this through a private discussion. She appears just as we lose Tetlewa, just as the project concludes. We've worked hard to become what we are. Will they praise her for our work when it's done? She's only a standby, I say, trying to be the voice of reason. And what she wants is what we want. We need to cooperate. So she says. That is Remwa, who considers himself smarter than the rest of us. We're all made to be equally intelligent. Remwa is just an ass. The conductors kept her away until now for a reason. She may be a troublemaker. So this is just really, really interesting. Part of me initially was like, did they lose Tetlewa because Tetlewa has been turned into Kalenli? Because there's an aspect of these stone eaters, I keep calling them stone eaters, but are they? I think they are. I don't feel like we've actually seen what they eat or had that talked about at all. But regardless, I don't really know when they disappear if they're actually gone, if they were simply relocated to another place where they're doing different work, if they're being experimented on somewhere, or if there is like a part of them that is taken and used to sort of create the human origins. Because I could see that from Hoa's point of view, when he's talking about Kalenli, he says that she is like them in practically every sense, other than her body. Like her abilities and the way that she talks to them are all identical. It's simply her humanness that sets her apart. And that makes me wonder if there isn't something that they're doing. The thing is that Kalenli is female and Tetlewa was male, but I don't necessarily see that being any kind of real obstacle. Yeah, I don't know. So Kalenli comes back the next day, and there is what they keep calling, I think the conductor. Yeah, Conductor Gallet. He is kind of like, I think, falling for a bit of an okie doke. It seems that Kalenli's humanity causes these conductors to trust her judgment a bit more than they would the others if they said this. But what they are trying to do is to get everyone at Kalenli's level. And that appears to not be happening. They thought, I think, that by bringing her in, she would manage to teach them. And my interpretation of what's happening here is that Kalenli is perfectly aware that's what they want her to do. And she is not interested. I think she is purposefully holding back because she knows that these poor creatures are being used and probably being dispensed with at times, and has decided that she is going to convince management, oh, I'm sorry, I've tried everything, but I think that we need to take them on some sort of excursion and give them experience. I think that's really the only way, like I've done my best and I know that you've seen some improvements, but it's really not where we want it to be, is it? So I think this is really the next step. That's what I think she's doing. And Gallet and the others have decided to trust her because she is like them in a more obvious way. And they're going to maybe regret this. So this is going to be interesting to watch. He is precisely angled and cleanly faceted and beautiful in a unique way. And he is also implacably deadly if not handled with precision. We don't let ourselves think about the fact that he's the one who killed Tetlewa. Now, that is said there, and I'm like, do they know that? Did they see it? Because when they talk about Tetlewa going away, I didn't get the impression that they knew for sure that Tetlewa was dead. But then the way this is done here, it sort of seems to be treated as like a foregone conclusion that, like, yeah, Tetlewa's dead, and it's likely this dude who killed him. but even more than likely. Like I feel like this sounds like they are certain. So at this point, all of the Stone Eaters kind of manipulate Gallet because he wants to send them out in 2 separate groups in order to get them the experience and exposure that seems to be required to level them up. And they manage to have like a bit of an argument that forces Gallet into a position of what he seems to think is like him taking charge, but it's actually him playing right into their hands. And it results in him agreeing that they should all go out in one large group rather than in 2 separate groups. So she believes the solution is outside experience. It's a suggestion that has merit and the benefit of being minimally invasive. So I really enjoy the moment where they sort of manipulate him. And then there is a moment where Hoa and Remwa communicate without Gallet being aware of it because they're using Earth speak. And Remwa sort of sends over, Hoa sends over to Remwa, excellent work. After Remwa manages to like push Gallet into letting them all out at the same time. We are to leave that very day. Clothing suitable for travel outdoors is brought to my quarters by junior conductors. I pull on the thicker cloth and shoes carefully, fascinated by the different textures, and then sit quietly while the junior conductor plaits my hair into a single white braid. Is this necessary for outside? It might help. You lot are going to stand out no matter what, but the more normal we can make you seem, the better. People will know we're part of the engine, I say, straightening just a little in pride. His fingers slow for a moment. I don't think he notices. That's not exactly... They're more likely to think you're something else. Don't worry, though. We'll send guards along to make sure there's no trouble. They'll be unobtrusive, but there. Kalenli insists that you can't be made to feel sheltered even if you are. They're more likely to think we're something else, I repeat slowly, thoughtfully. His fingers twitch, pulling a few strands harder than necessary. Well, it's a distant possibility, but they have to know you aren't... I mean, it's... He sighs. Oh, evil death. It's complicated. Don't worry about it. Conductors say this when they've made a mistake. I don't ping the others with it right away, because we minimize communication outside of sanctioned meetings. People who are not tuners can perceive magic only in rudimentary ways. They use machines and instruments to do what is natural for us. Still, they're always monitoring us in some measure, so we cannot allow them to learn the extent to which we speak to each other and hear them when they think we cannot. So, I had said earlier that I was thinking that maybe Kalenli has a connection with magic that they don't. It's mentioned here that they use magic, but she seems to be able to use it more purposefully even than they can. I don't know. Maybe the magic has nothing to do with it, but I feel like it does. After conferring with other conductors over the vine, mine decides to brush my face with paint and powder. It's supposed to make me look like them. It actually makes me look like someone whose white skin has been painted brown. I must look skeptical when he shows me the mirror. My conductor sighs and complains that he's not an artist. When Kalenli sees them, she is not having it. Like, this whole thing is just... I think she thinks it's a bit grotesque. And immediately is like, I am not taking them out looking like that. This is ridiculous. And takes them over to the bathroom in order to scrub their faces. So... She says, let's see. Oh, right. Here it is. She hums while she does it. Does that mean she's happy? When she takes my arm to wipe the gunk off my face, I search hers to try to understand. Her gaze sharpens when she notices. You're a thinker, she says. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. We all are, I say. I allow a brief rumble of nuance. We have to be. Exactly. You think more than you have to. Why do you laugh at their fear? It's a stupid question. Should have asked it through the earth, not out loud. She stops wiping my face. Remwa glances at me in bland reproach, then goes to the entrance of the alcove. I hear him asking the guard there to please ask a conductor whether we are in danger of sun damage without the protection of the paint. The guard laughs and calls over her companion to relay the question as if it's ridiculous. During this moment of distraction purchased for us by this exchange, Kalenli then resumes scrubbing me. Why not laugh at it? She says. They would like you better if you didn't laugh. Maybe I don't want to be liked. You could be. You're like them. Not enough. More than me. If you tried. She laughs at me too. It isn't cruel, I know instinctively. It's pitying. But underneath the laugh, her presence is suddenly as still and pent as pressurized stone. Anger again. Not at me, but triggered by my words nevertheless. I always seem to make her angry. They're afraid because we exist, she says. There's nothing we did to provoke their fear other than exist. There's nothing we can do to earn their approval except stop existing. So we can either die like they want or laugh at their cowardice and go on with our lives. Guys. And Hoa's like, that doesn't make sense. And then almost immediately is like, oh, doesn't it? And he's thinking about the fact that there had once been 16 of them. And now there are only 6. And the others questioned and were decommissioned for questioning. Others obeyed without question, and they were decommissioned for it. Bargained, gave up, helped, despaired. We have tried everything, done all they asked and more, and yet now there are only 6 of us left. That means we're better than the others were, I tell myself, scowling. Smarter, more adaptable, more skilled. This matters, does it not? We're components of the great machine, the pinnacle of Selangistine biomagistry. I hope I said that fucking right. If some of us had to be removed from the machine because of flaws, and Remwa hears this and says Tetlewa was not flawed. And when Hoa looks over at Remwa, Remwa is doing a rare thing and showing his emotion on his face, even as he is communicating via the earth. I set my jaw. If Tetlewa was not flawed, then that means he was decommissioned for no reason at all. Yes. Remwa, who rarely looks pleased on a good day, has now curled his lip in disgust. At me. I'm so shocked by this that I forget to pretend indifference. That is precisely her point. It doesn't matter what we do. The problem is them. Listen. This is the thing, guys. There is such a huge dose of realness there that I think white people don't want to face. We really want to believe that the progress that has been made by some of our kind over the past century is an indicator that these prejudices that we have can be overcome. And I think that's true for some, maybe even for most. But I don't believe we will ever fully be rid of people who just hate for the sheer fact of existence. I think that is part of what has made me feel so utterly depressed over the past half a year, is kind of coming to the conclusion that humanity can advance and advance in so many ways, But we keep on making these same mistakes in the way that we treat our fellow human beings over and over again. And those mistakes are all based in the same sureness of supremacy. They all stem from white folk really thinking they are fundamentally better in some way. And when I say better, there's a knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people have to that. But there is no other way to explain how confident colonizers are coming into places that they don't understand and telling the native people of those areas, you're doing it wrong, and taking over and acting like that's helping. Other than they think they know better. They think they are better. And we have not learned. It has slowed down in some ways. There's some more oversight to it, to the colonizing, but it isn't over. I think we behave as if that's like like in our history. I mean, it was just early last year, granted, but that we had native people protesting a pipeline being built on land that was supposed to be protected, that basically got straight up taken from them after we had signed something saying that this would not happen again. The pipeline was built anyway, and then guess what? Leaked. That just happened. Us stealing land from native people and doing what the fuck we want to it and ruining it is happening all the time, everywhere, every day. And that has to stem from us genuinely thinking that we know better. The hating anybody who is not white for existing is real. It's really real. And I just don't think enough white people understand the reality of that and want to face the reality of that, because it makes you feel despair. But I think that people of color probably have been experiencing this despair from a pretty young age, when they begin to realize that there's no getting out of this. This whole conversation Hoa has about how we're still around because we did things right. I complied with police, so I didn't get shot. I have a good job and I don't do drugs, so they'll respect me. I'm dressed respectably, so they will see me a different way. And slowly, as you get older, as a person of color, you begin to realize, no, those outer affectations can maybe mitigate it for a bit, but ultimately, you aren't white. And that, when it comes down to it, is what they see. And Hoa is kind of figuring out respectability politics is garbage, is really what that was. And realizing that whatever reason they're going to give, which they don't even feel the need to give, by the way. It's not like the conductors tell them, oh yeah, we decommissioned them for this and that reason. They don't even feel the need to explain. None of the reasons that they would give are going to be adequate anyway. And pretending to those who remain that they are still here because they are better is another really good way of controlling them and making them believe that they have some bit of control themselves. It makes them feel like they can manage perception. And it's sort of similar to the way that those who are impoverished they buy into this myth that they are going to be able to save themselves from poverty if they are just smart enough with their money. And if you are living in poverty, that is because somebody is exploiting you. That is not because you are just bad at, sure, we can be not great at managing money, but I have a really hard time believing everybody is rich because they are good at managing money. They just are rich. And so they can be bad at managing money without it ruining their lives. And if you get poor people convinced that they can get themselves out of the hole they're in with their own behavior, you can walk away and they won't hold you responsible for the fact that they are impoverished and that you are exploiting them. They will look at other people who are impoverished and think about how much those people are a bad example and how they won't do the thing those people are doing. And it's really, I mean, this is what you do. You make people feel better than and give them a false sense of control over how other people see them and what their circumstances are. It's just, I mean, it's just fucking, that's just how it works. Okay, so I'm 50 minutes in and I only finished that like one section, guys. See? Thank you, Denise. I really, this would have been screwed. Okay, so chapter 5. We are back with Essun, and the attack in the midst of this like stone forest begins. And it's really interesting because she at first, and of course I do as well as a reader, assume that the two-pronged attack is coming from the same tribe split into two groups. But what we find out is that a tribe diverged because of Orogenes, and the two factions tend to work together mostly, but are not the same team. So the first thing is that Essun is sort of, I don't want to say surprised by, but she sort of does not respect, I guess, is that everybody in her camp is aware that there's an attack coming. It's really clear that this stone forest has been created to facilitate that kind of attack. This is a trap, but there really isn't another way through. So they have to go this way, and thus they are hyper alert the entire time. So eventually, the tribe that's like waiting, the calm, is like, all right, we've been waiting for them to let their guard down, and it's just not happening. So I guess we just have to attack now. And it's not a great time. They wind up being like pretty much taken care of without any pomp and circumstance to it. Now, Ika notices this feeling of an orogeny out there. And Ika and Essun are assuming that one arm of the calm that's attacking is going to like start off the fight, and then the orogeny that has pent up this energy off to the other side will release that energy, and they will be the team that started off the attack will clean up whatever the orogeny doesn't get, right? So it'll be like a two-pronged, totally different tactics attack. It's just really, I found this sort of fascinating, the way that this works, as it turns out. And the way that Ika and Essun thought that it worked assumes that these people are able to work together. They keep forgetting, I think, that most comms are not going to be tolerant of orogenes. And it's really funny to think about how Ika, she is an orogeny herself, and like Essun had really underestimated what Ika could do because she wasn't a fulcrum trained. But then remember, it turns out that Ika can do things that Essun couldn't, because Ika doesn't have the limitations of professional education to guide her down specific paths. And so she has an instinctual relationship with her ability that explores other options that Essun has never even thought to look at before. But I love the fact that Essun and Ika constantly sort of forget that the setup that they've got going with an orogeny in charge of a mixed comm is unheard of. Like, everybody is so shocked. Like, that's part of why, what's his face? And I'll get to his name in a minute, but I've forgotten it for now. He is so surprised at the fact that when Ika calls out, we don't have to fight, you can join us, we have Orogenies here, he is so startled by this like announcement that he doesn't attack the way he had planned to, because he is just sitting there like floored by this and unsure what to do next now that he knows that he's not just attacking a bunch of stills. It changes everything, you know? And I really enjoy that, being such a like, sort of, I'm picturing like when you put a stick through the spokes of a bicycle and it just like stops it short and it's like flips over. That's what I feel like was going on there. So, okay. From the other side of the stone forest, as thin, attenuated agglomerations of silver suddenly blur into chaotic movement and come charging towards you. Other raiders, evil, earth, you were all so focused on the Raga that you didn't even notice the ones behind you. You hear them now, though, voices rising, cursing, feet pounding on ashy sand. They're attacking, you call. No shit, Ika snaps, drawing a glass knife. I love that moment so much. And this moment is really weird. So, Essun is trying to concentrate her energy. You could take out all 6 in half a breath with a single precision Taurus, but you can also feel how aligned you are. Yika's silver is concentrated like that of other Ragas you've observed, but hers is still layered, jagged, a little jittery. It flows every which way within her as she jumps down from the cargo wagon and shouts for people to help the sparse strongbacks near the cluster of raiders, running to help herself. Your magic flows with smooth clarity, every line matching perfectly in direction and flow to every other line. You don't know how to change it back to the way it was, if that's even possible. And you know instinctively that using the silver, when you're like this, will pack every particle of your body together as neatly as a mason lays a wall of bricks. You'll be stone the same way. So you fight your instincts and hide, much as that rankles. I am at a loss. I don't know what this means. She can't use her magic without this happening. And like later on, she does use it in order to save herself and her other people. And she has to sacrifice her left breast in order to do it. She has to concentrate all of that energy that's going to be compacting into a single portion of her body and has to make a really split-second decision of what she can afford to lose. And, I mean, boobs are just fat. They're not necessary. If you're not going to have babies, who cares? So, yeah, it makes sense that's what she chooses to lose. But I don't understand why this is happening. So here's my weirdo theory. I was saying that Kalenli was like a version of the stone people, that the stone people were the wrong creation and the Kalenli was closer to what it was that they were trying to go for. And that's going along with the assumption that human beings did indeed create the stone people, which I don't really buy. But let's like just go with that and say that's true. The way this is working out here, Essun's attitude is that by being turned into stone, that's essentially dying. She sees that happening as like the end of her life. Do we know that's true? We have Hoa eat her arm, so it's certainly she can be like pulled apart. But correct me if I'm wrong. Did she see a face that looked like Alabaster's after he had supposedly died at some point? I feel like there is something that happens to make her feel like Alabaster is like still around. And forgive me guys for not being more precise on this because there is so much time between these episodes lately. It's been over a month since the last 3 chapters. But I feel like I remember there being a hint that Alabaster has somehow survived. And survived is the wrong word because it makes it sound like his body has like continued to live. I feel like he has transformed. And I think she has this like reaction to the parts of her that turn to stone as if she is somehow breaking apart and slowly dying. But I don't know if she is right about that. She may just be ignorant to what she actually is, and using her magic in this instinctive, clear flowing way is what turns her into the correct version of herself. In fact, basically what I'm saying is we're the conductors fucking with the energy, like expenditure of the stone people to create this layered, jagged, jittery magic that Ika has in order to turn them into mostly human. When, if they were able to access their ability in a clear, straightforward way, they would be what they truly are, which is stone. In other words, are the conductors trying to make the stone people like themselves, simply to make themselves feel better, and in doing so, taking some of their power away? And wouldn't that make sense thematically? Right? Like the idea that we don't like you because you're so different from us. So what we're going to try and do is make you a little bit more palatable by turning, like, it's basically like forced assimilation, right? Like this is cutting off the hair of Native people and forcing them into boarding schools and tearing them away from their own history and their own people and leaders and making them into something else so that you can like get them into your society and make yourself feel more comfortable, but you'll all know still that they really aren't like you. And so you'll continue to like definitely be prejudiced and racist against them and definitely keep them separate and segregated and you know, experiencing an entirely different version of the world than you, but you've made yourself feel better about it. Like that feels fucking right to me. That feels like human nature to me. I don't even want to say human nature. That feels like oppressor nature to me. I don't know. But there's just something about the fact that she says her magic is flowing with clarity and smoothness and is instinctive, and it's doing something to her that scares her, that she doesn't understand. And I can't see that thing that's happening naturally when her magic seems to be doing the best it's ever done. That result, I feel like, can't actually be as negative as she thinks it is. And there's a part of me that wonders about like the stone eaters that eat the parts of these orogenes that turn into stone. Is that a means of retaining part of these people for like basically storing it so that later when they completely turn back into what they are, you'll have all the pieces to put back together like a puzzle? Because I don't know that these stone eaters digest it and excrete it. Where does it go? I don't know. I just have like, so I might be completely out of line here and really wrong. And some of you probably are listening to this and laughing like, wow, okay. But honestly, things are so weird in this story that I don't feel like much is outside of the potential possibilities here. So she sees Daniel, and this is an interesting thing. You catch a glimpse of something stunning. Daniel, having appropriated one of the spear-whittled sticks that form the fence, is using it to carve a bloody swath through the raiders. She's phenomenal, spinning and stabbing and blocking and stabbing again, twirling the stick in between attacks as if she's fought calmless a million times. That's not just being an experienced strongback. That's something else. She's just too good. But it follows, doesn't it? Not like Renanis made her the general of their army for her charm. So this makes me wonder, is Daniel X like a guardian or trained to like by guardians or something? Like there is something about the what is being implied there that makes it feel like she's more than human. So at this point, Essun gets up and is trying to like approach the orogeny that she can feel out there, and finally realizes that there's several, and they are all sort of like positioned around in the quote treetops because there's just rock, but they are like sort of keeping an eye on things, but not acting the way that she expected them to. And she finally comes across this blind, and there's a dude hidden behind it. And she can sense that the energy coming off of him is fulcrum energy. This is somebody who has been trained. And she starts to connect with them on that level. Guardians supposedly do not join comms when seasons come, which means they die. And in fact, the only Guardian you've seen since the rifting was that one with Daniel and the Renanis army. She died in the boilbug storm that you invoked, and you're glad of it, since she was one of the bearskin killers, and there's more than the usual wrong with that kind. Either way, here's another ex-blackjacket out here alone, and maybe afraid and maybe hair-triggered to kill. You know what that's like, don't you? But this one hasn't attacked yet. You have to find some way to make a connection. So she starts talking about, I remember the crucibles, the instructors killing us to save us. Did they make you have children too? I know they broke you, your hand. All of us, they broke us so they could. And the person that she's speaking to, whom she can't see, has this really like gut reaction that causes a Taurus to go flying outward. I don't believe that this was an intentional like attack. I believe that he was taken so by surprise at her completely nailing his experience and connecting with him this way that he just lost control of himself for a second. And she manages to stop him because her power is much stronger. You react magically, grabbing those whipping tendrils of silver that the Taurus had stirred, and belatedly you realize Orogeny affects magic, but isn't magic itself. In fact, the magic flinches away from it. That's why you can't work high-level Orogeny without negatively impacting your ability to deploy magic. How nice to finally understand. So maybe that's part of the thing with like making the stone people more human, is like they are turning them into tools that specifically are like based on orogeny in order to accomplish their very specific goal. And by doing so, separate them from the main thrust of their magic because they're doing something really specialized. I don't know. But once she kind of like comes back to herself, she realizes that she has to choose a body part to sacrifice because this magic is like just, it's doing its thing. You feel the amplitude of the resonance rise as your cells begin to align and compress into stone. So, left breast, and then she gets up and this person is saying, Demaya, it really is you. Sorry about the Taurus. It was just, you don't know what it's been like. Mexiques, says your mouth. And poor Mexiques is a disaster. Both his legs below the thighs are gone. One of his eyes is clouded and doesn't actually seem to see. The left side of his head has just like tons of scars, and his ear seems to be sealed shut, almost as if there was like a really horrible burn or something that happened on that side of his head. So he walks around on his hands, and when she shakes his hand later, his hands are basically like feet, but not the average foot, the kind of feet of people who walk around barefoot in the wilderness their whole lives. And he is really like amazed to see her, and also kind of impressed at her power, being able to overpower his so easily. And she calls him Archete because you remember that he always preferred the name he was born with. And he is sort of touched at the fact that she remembers that. I liked that. And she realizes that it is kind of funny that she remembers that, and sort of thinks back to the earlier time before she even went to the fulcrum, and remembers that she had a brother, and she can't even remember what his name was, and that probably if she saw him, she wouldn't remember him. The grits of the fulcrum were your siblings, in pain, if not in blood. Yikes. That must be a weird feeling to know that you had somebody that was like that close of family. It's not the same as losing an uncle or a cousin's name. This is your brother, you know? So she basically invites him into the comm, and his reaction is like, yeah, I'm not going without everybody, and I have a hard time believing that your comm leader is going to accept all of us. And the others are at this point sort of listening, and they can see that this is unlikely, and they call her out a little bit as she tries to act as if this is even possible. They all sort of are like, don't play with us. We know that this is not really going to happen. He talks about the way that there is this deal between him and a guy named Olimshin. Got kicked out of 2 comms for anger management issues. He would have gotten us all killed raiding, so I told anybody who wanted to live and could stand to come follow me, and we did our own thing. This side of the forest is ours, that side was theirs. I figured he was expecting me to hit you lot. That's how we usually do it. I ice him, his group grabs what it can before I and mine can show up. We both get enough to go on a little longer. But I was all fucked up from what your headswoman said. Olemshin should have broken off once he saw I wasn't going to ice you, but, well, I did say he was going to get them killed. Good riddance. And he asks what happened to your arm, because it's gone, and she asks what happened to your legs, and neither of them actually answer the other. So, like, I'm seeing all of these scars on his face, and assuming that the legs are a result of, like, injuries stemming from the same incident. But there's a sort of, like, underlying subtext there that maybe he lost his legs using the kind of magic that she is. I don't know if that's it or not, but maybe they just don't feel like they want to talk about it. So she says, you know, she makes this offer. We don't have to be this. We don't have to be what they made us. Listen, and he's coughing, by the way, and she thinks to herself about how it's kind of a pebbly cough. And I didn't realize that that was literal. He says at one point, listen to the rocks in my chest. And for a moment, I was like, oh, that's a result of the orogeny magic. And then I realized, like, that is supposed to be the result of the ash that he's been inhaling. I'm pretty certain. And he says, no comm will let us in. Ika might be willing to take in a commless Raga, but not the rest. Then again, you can never figure out quite what Ika will do. I can ask. Chuckles all around, jaded and thin and tired. A few more rattly coughs in addition to Mexix's. These people are starved nearly to death, and half of them are sick. This is pointless. Still. If you don't come with us, you'll die here. Alemshin's people had most of the supplies. We'll go take them. And it's all of us or none of us. Up to the head woman, you say, refusing to commit, but you know haggling when you hear it. He's fully prepared to walk away if Ika can't meet his opening price. It bothers you. I'll also put in a good word for your character, or at least your character 30 years ago. He smiles a little. Hard not to see that smile as patronizing. Look at you, trying to make this something more than it is. You're probably projecting. I love this internal monologue. Essun's like constant assessing of a thing and then doubting her own assessment is really interesting and is just exactly how I think all the time. So at this point, he is like kind of sitting back and really taking a look at Essun, trying to sense what it is that he is feeling from her. And when she says something about the Renanus army being dead, he says that he sensed something really big happening from the direction that they went, to which she has to admit that it was her, and she finds it sort of hard to say. And she doesn't want to talk about it right now. She sort of wants to wait and see if Ika will take them in and then sit down maybe and tell him the story. But as of right now, he's not one of them. I don't know that she wants to share this with somebody, like I get that. So he shifts his weight and lifts his right hand. The skin is thick as horn, beyond calloused and filthy. You wipe your hand on your pants without thinking after. His people chuckle at this. Then you lead him back toward Kostrima, into the light. So this chapter ends with the description of like Orogenes again giving their lives in order to save a town. And this is like the theme at the end of each of these chapters, is like another example of Orogenes who are rejected and hated, still sacrificing everything in order to save everybody else. And then we reach Nassun makes her fate. So Nassun and Schaffa are traveling. She has like a hard time initially because of her shoulder injury, but it finally begins to heal and they are able to sort of pick up the pace. And they don't really run into many people, and it's not surprising considering how advanced the season is by this point. There aren't going to be a lot of people on their own. In many ways, the near solitude suits Nassun fine. No other guardians to tiptoe around, no calm folk whose irrational fears must always be planned for, not even other Orogeny children. Nassun misses the others, misses their chatter and the comradeship that she enjoyed with them for so brief a time. But at the end of the day, she resented how much time and attention Schaffa had to give them. She's old enough to know that it's childish for her to be jealous of such a thing. Doesn't mean she isn't glad and greedy for the chance to have Schaffa all to herself. I liked this, that makes a lot of sense to me. Especially when she just had to kill one of her parents, and the other parent is somebody who hurt her and whom she looks back at with resentment and maybe even a drop of hatred. Having somebody who feels like they care about her purely for herself, to the point that she is aware of the constant sacrifice that they are making in not drawing power from her, they are willing to put their own well-being and their sense of health at risk in order to keep her safe. And I don't know if she recognizes that her mother used to do that. I'm sure she doesn't. But as of right now, this is the first overt example of that in her life. And it clearly means a lot to her. So this ties in because Schaffa, because he is not feeding from her and taking bits of her silver, as she calls it, he has a lot of trouble sleeping. He runs out of energy. He is just not doing super well. So Nassun, when he does manage to sort of fall into this fitful sleep, she begins to touch him at the back of his neck at his sesapine and get a little drop of her silver into his system to help him sleep. And at first, she keeps calling it the core stone that's inside him, that little shard of it that's like pulling and trying to take the magic. At first, this thing reacts with such greed to the touch of the magic that she has to kind of like yank her hand away because it is trying to take way too much of her real quickly. And so she has to be really careful about it. But as time goes on, at first, giving him some of her silver results in her being more tired the next day. As time goes on, though, she finds that she is making more of it. Her body is somehow producing more of it in reaction to the fact that she is giving some of it away. And she begins to be able to sustain him without actually having to deplete herself at all. And this is really interesting to me, the fact that her body compensates for it. I am fascinated by this. As they travel, Schaffa is telling her stories about the Yemenis that he knows, like ancient Yemenis, who all, because they live in a city, don't have the kinds of jobs that she has seen or understands. Strongbacks of the Union and those without, varying by their connections and financial security. Innovators from generations-old families who competed to be sent off to the 7th university, and innovators who merely built and repaired trinkets out of the city's shantytowns. It's strange to realize that much of Yemenis' strangeness was simply because it lasted so long. It had old families, books in its libraries that were older than Terimo, organizations that remembered and avenged slights from 3 or 4 seasons back. Schaffa also tells her about the fulcrum, although not much. There's another memory hole there, deep and fathomless as an obelisk, though Nassun finds herself unable to resist probing its edges. It is a space that her mother once inhabited, after all, and in spite of everything, this fascinates her. Schaffa remembers Essun poorly, however, even when Nassun works up the courage to ask direct questions about the matter. He tries to answer Nassun, but his speech is halting when he does, and the look that crosses his face is pained, troubled, paler than usual. She therefore forces herself to ask these questions slowly, hours or days apart, to give him time to recover in between. What she learns is little more than she has already guessed about her mother and the fulcrum and life before the season. It helps to hear it, nevertheless. So as they travel, things just get worse in terms of like the conditions. There's a lot more ash falling from the sky. They start coming across water supplies that are clearly contaminated. And finally, they come to the edge of this crater, which is called Old Man's Pucker, which I just hate so deeply, guys. I just hate it. I hate it. I hate this name. I hate it. Oh, God, I hate it. So this one is because there's like 2 calderas, as it's called, and usually they're not as perfect a formation as this one is. But Nassun can tell that it's perfectly formed because the eruption was so hot that the whole geological formation nearly destroyed itself. What remains has gone to glass, naturally tempered enough that not even centuries of weathering has damaged it much. The volcano that created this Samian is extinct now, its ancient magma chamber long since emptied, not even a whiff of leftover heat lingering. Once upon a time, though, the pucker was the site of a truly awesome and horrific puncturing of the world's crust. So they camp a mile or 2 away from the pucker, and Nassun can hear animals shrieking. And they are aware that this thing is not, like, whatever it is that they can hear, it's not going to come out of the forest that is right around the pucker, because the pucker has, like, basically its own ecosystem going on that is very different from what's happening up outside the lip of the rim. So they stay outside of it to stay out of the range of this creature, but they are both still really nervous about it. And once they start climbing down into it, they realize that there is like no pathway. it's like all so overgrown. There are breaks in the wall around it to get in, so it was meant to let people in. But that's not... That's it. There's no actual walkways. And as they step through this wall, Nassun feels that there is something underneath them. She says the Dead Civ ruin is underground. In the magma chamber? Maybe? Nassun can't believe it either at first, but the silver does not lie. She notices something else strange as her seasonal awareness of the area expands. The silver mirrors the perturbations of topography in the forest here. The silver here is brighter somehow, and it seems to flow more readily from plant to plant and rock to rock. These blend to become larger, dazzling flows that all run together like streams until the ruin sits within a pool of glimmering, churning light. She can't make out details, there's so much of it. Just empty space and an impression of buildings. It's huge, this ruin. A city like no city Nassun has ever assessed. So I'm wondering if this is where Hoa is having his flashbacks, if this is like the same place. I don't know. And she is looking back at the sapphire that has been following them, and Schaffa notices it and says that he does think the obelisks were made in places like this. Like, this is one of several cities that he has been to of its type. And she asks what could have happened here to like cause it to just like fall apart when it had definitely been really heavily peopled. And he says the shattering. The shattering was 100 different seasons all over the world, all striking at once. It's a marvel that anything of humanity survived. I really don't know what that means, because she is saying, she says like a volcano, and he's like, that's what it was here, but it happened everywhere in different ways. Why? Is that because of the moon? Is that related? I don't know. So then they begin to have to kind of really push themselves. They start running into like this kind of thin tree with long blades instead of leaves that I keep picturing bamboo. It might not be like that, but that's what I keep thinking of. And it's kind of hard to like push through it. And Nassun is exhausted because, again, there's no like walk through. They have to cut a path for themselves. And she keeps on trying to get him to like stop for a break. But he's like, dude, we cannot be out here after dark and we are already behind. We need to fucking move. I'm sorry. I know you're tired and I am too, but we need to do this. Like, there is no time to lose. And she pushes herself and she keeps like pausing and trying to like sort of stall as she says. Like, she at first tries to suggest that she can create a pathway for them using her orogeny. And Schaffa says, no, freezing the plants would make them more difficult, and a shake could cause the magma chamber below us to collapse. Then she suggests using the silver instead of the orogeny, and he says, other guardians may be near. It's unlikely, but it's still a possibility. And I guess they would be able to sense the magic being used. So at this point, he says, all I can remember is this is how we get there. And she says, where? And he says, warrant. And she starts to ask why. And he cuts her off and is like, we cannot talk about this right now. And she finally realizes that if she keeps complaining, she's just going to die. That's all there is to it. There is something out there waiting for the dark that is going to kill them. And she can either suck it up and fucking live or keep whining and let herself be eaten. So she really, really pushes it. And then they finally come out to this like strange, empty, sort of like smooth cut area that is it's made out of white material. It says that is neither metal nor stone, which I think is sort of plastic maybe. And Schaffa goes over and puts his hand on the edge of this curl of metal, as she describes it, which turns out to be a banister coming up out of the ground. And him putting his hand on it opens up a sort of like trap door, for lack of a better word, in the ground. And it opens up, and there are stairs that go down. And as they head downward, the lights turn on as they're heading down and turn off behind them automatically. And that really startled me, that there's still like a power source that exists that is able to react to them after all this time. What's that about? In the distant part of the grass forest that they just traversed, there is a high-pitched grating noise that Nassun immediately identifies as animal. Chitinous, maybe. A louder, closer version of the screeches they heard the night before. Some sort of grasshopper, I believe, he says. Or cicadas, perhaps. So they go through, and the door closes behind them, and they just begin to head down into the city. So that is the end of that chapter. There's another like short installment from a history book about a bunch of Orogeny saving people's lives, as usual. They managed to shift an entire city to a safer area at one point, which is nuts. And that's it. So thank you very much to Denise for commissioning a longer version of this episode. I needed it. I really used up that time, baby. I almost had to push it still. So I really appreciate it. I hope that you guys have been enjoying this episode. Thank you to Laura in the chat. I'm sorry, Laura. I had the book open in front of me the whole time because I quote very heavily from this book in a way that I don't necessarily do with others. So it's been open in front of me. But Laura is saying that she believed that what the Stone Eaters were told by the conductors is also propaganda, which, yeah, that's a good word for it. I always forget that word. But I am just really curious about whether any of my theories hold any water at all. So we shall see. All right, everybody. Thank you again so much for listening and supporting the show. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Till then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.